Right, so, after the First Battle of Moytura, Naoise, the king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, he wasn't allowed to be king anymore. The reason he wasn't allowed to be king anymore is that he had lost an arm in battle. And the Tuatha Dé Danann, they had a law that said only those who are pure and unblemished may be king. And because the Tuatha Dé Danann, and indeed Ireland in general, didn't really have a familial line of succession, new kings were chosen. The next king after Naoise was Bres. Now Bres's only qualification for kingship was that he was extremely pretty. He was the prettiest man, the prettiest creature, the prettiest thing to have ever walked upon the earth. And he was an absolutely terrible king, which in my opinion is just punishment on the Tuatha Dé Danann for having stupid, ableist laws. Now, the problem with Bres is that he was half Fomorian and he favoured his Fomorian family in all things. He instituted awful taxes on Ireland. The Tuatha Dé Danann, they had to give over 2/3 of their cattle, their livestock, their grain, even their children over to the Fomorians. Bres was cruel and selfish and mean. He wouldn't even give lodging and food to travelling poets and musicians. And that was his downfall. You see, one of the travelling poets, a man named Querbra, he wrote the first satire about Bres, and it was after that that everything really went wrong for him. The Tuatha Dé Danann tore him down out of the fort of Tara and cast him out. And so Bres, he ran back to his father among the Fomorians and he explained what happened, and his father went, "Ah, well, yeah, you were being a shit. Of course they threw you out. What do you expect? Ah, but sure, look, it makes the family look bad if you're out here. I'll build an army for you. We'll go sort it out. It's grand. It's fine. It's fine. Stop being such a little shit, right?" So Bres, his father, and the Fomorians, they start building a huge army to take Ireland back from the Tuatha Dé Danann. And the Tuatha Dé Danann, they're thinking, oh no, this isn't great. This isn't great. We should probably start preparing. In the meantime, Dian Cecht, the doctor of the Tuatha Dé Danann, he decides that Naoise, he needs a new arm. It's about time. So he makes him a glorious silver arm, imbued with magic, so it has all the function of a real flesh and blood arm. And Naoise, he loved it. He thought this was great. And he became known as Naoise of the Silver Arm. But Dian Cecht's son, Mearch, he didn't think that was a very good cure for this at all. He didn't think that was an appropriate form of treatment for a king. And so, he thought of something else. He made Naoise a new arm out of flesh and blood and bone, and he pulled off the silver arm and stitched this new arm in until it was functioning and working and beautiful and had all the feeling of a real arm. And because he was no longer blemished, because he was made whole again, Naoise was able to become king of the Tuatha Dé Danann once more. Now Dian Cecht, in a fit of jealousy, hacked a sword into his son's head. But his son was such a good physician, he was able to heal the wound. So Dian Cecht, in another fit of jealousy, hacks a little bit deeper with his sword. And Mearch, he was such a good physician, he healed it a third time. And Dian Cecht, in a final fit of jealousy, cut his son's head completely in half. And then he was dead. And that was the end of that. It turns out that neither Dian Cecht or Mearch need have bothered in fixing Naoise's arm or replacing it at all, because only a few days later along comes Lugh to the hill of Tara. Now everyone in Tara, all of the Tuatha Dé Danann, they were sitting at a feast hall, they were sitting at a table having their dinner, and Lugh comes across a guard, and the guard says, "What do you do? Only a man of skill may enter the hill of Tara." And Lugh says, "I'm a cupbearer." The guard says, "We already have a cupbearer. You're not coming inside." So Lou says, I am a warrior. We already have a warrior, you're not coming inside. I am a singer. We already have a singer. I am a marine biologist. We already have a marine biologist. And they go through every skill in the world. Absolutely every art and science that there is. And the Tuatha Dé Danann, they have all of them already. So Lou says, tell you what, do you have anyone who is skilled in all of these things, in all of these arts and sciences all at once? If you do have that, I'll be on my way. If you don't, you should let me in. And so the guard thinks about that. And he goes in and he talks to King Naoise, and Naoise's like, he can do all of that. There's a fella outside who can do all of those things. Bring him in, sure, bring him in. You should have brought him in when he said he had 5, not all of them. So Lou, he comes in, and Naoise, he's like, listen lad, you're good at everything. You be king. You'll be better at it, just be king. Grand. So Lou becomes king, and the replacement of Naoise's arm, except for Naoise's perspective, has been fairly pointless. He regained the kingship for a very short amount of time. So Lou, he starts marshalling the troops. He starts talking to the Tuatha Dé Danann, asking, what'll you do to help? What'll you do to help? What'll you do to help? What's your unique skill? What's your unique talent? And everyone starts listing things off. The Darkda says what he'll do. The Morrigan says what she'll do. The Druids say what they'll do. And Lou, he says, I'll do all of that. But I'll also make it so that our warriors have unbridled strength and courage and skill. Because he will fucking show off. I hate that prick Lou. And they start hacking and slashing at each other, taking their weapons, driving them into one another. The Darkda wades through the Fomorian forces with his mighty club, each swing taking down 300 at a blow. With mighty warriors, great heroes and powerful magicians on both sides, the Fomorians and the Tuatha Dé Danann, they inflict equal casualties on one another. But the next day, the Fomorians were shocked to discover that despite the hard battling from the day before, the Tuatha Dé Danann were in perfect health. There was not a wound, not a scratch on any of them. And though their weapons surely must have been chipped and blunted and hacked to pieces the previous day, they were all completely intact and fine and operational. And days and days and days of this. And every day the Tuatha Dé Danann were just as healthy, just as vigorous as the first day. Their weapons just as clean, just as bright, just as beautiful as the first day. And so the Fomorians, they sent a spy. They sent a spy to see what was going on in the Tuatha Dé Danann camp. How were they doing this? And the spy, he finds that Dian Cecht has a cauldron filled with steaming water and herbs and plants and minerals. And that he takes a terribly injured, legs broken, gashes throughout his body soldier, and he places him in the cauldron. And when the soldier comes out of the cauldron, he's whole again. His injuries are gone, his wounds are gone. When he went into the smithy to see how the Tuatha Dé Danann were recovering and fixing their weapons so quickly, he saw that their weaponsmiths were building new weapons in seconds out of almost nothing. He saw that they could repair them in seconds with almost no materials. And he thought to himself, what can we do? How can we possibly win against this? And just as he was turning to return to the Fomorian camp and tell all that he saw, he was spotted by one of the smiths, who took up a spear and threw it at him, piercing him in the shoulder. He pulled the spear out of the wound and he ran back to the Fomorian camp, and he just managed to get out his report before dropping dead to the ground. And at this, Bres and his father and the Fomorians, they were shaken. They were demoralized. And they were filled with steely determination, for they had one weapon, one ultimate weapon that they could unleash upon the Tuatha De Danann to try and even the field. They had the great Fomorian chieftain, the giant Balor. Balor, the chieftain who had a death ray for a face. I'm going to explain that. Balor was known as Balor of the Baleful Eye. He had only one eye in his head, and as I said, he was a giant. His eye was so huge that the eyelid needed a team of men pulling at chains to open it. And when it was open, it cast forth a horrible, baleful light that annihilated everything it touched. So Balor emerged upon the field. And the men, they pulled on the chains to drag open his eyelid, and he stared at the Tuatha De Danann forces, obliterating them with the beam from his eye. Until Lugh, that show-off prick, came forward. He cast down his sword. He cast down his bow, his spears, his javelins, his axes, his unreasonable amount of weapons. And he pulled out a simple sling. Putting a single stone in the sling, he whirled it around his head, cast it at Balor. The stone struck Balor in the eye and forced the eye back out of the back of Balor's head, and suddenly that horrible, baleful beam was turned upon the Fomorian armies, obliterating huge swathes of their forces. Because that prick Lugh, who was the grandson of Balor, I may add, he couldn't do it with a sword or a spear. No. He had to be a disrespectful little prick and use a sling, a child's toy, to slay his mighty grandfather, chieftain of the Fomorians, Balor of the Baleful Eye, the giant with a death ray for a face. And at this, the Fomorians knew there was nothing they could do. The Tuatha De Danann, their physicians were too swift. The healing was too perfect. Their smithies too fast. There was nothing they could do to resist them. And they had lost their greatest weapon, Balor of the Baleful Eye. All they could do was surrender. And Bres negotiated his stay of execution by providing them with knowledge of the harvest and when best to conduct it. And that was the end of Balor of the Baleful Eye. And it was the end of the kingship of Bres and of the Second Battle of Moytura.